This show is supported by Twin Cities Eye Consultants. No matter your seat at the match, Twin Cities Eye Consultants will make sure you can see your favorite players. Book your next eye exam 24/7 at tcecmn.com. Welcome in, Loons fans, to another edition of the Matchday Preview presented by Twin Cities Eye Consultants. Jonathan Harrison, you're joined once again by Manny Lagos. Manny, how are you? How are you doing? I know we've got a very disappointing result to talk about at the weekend, but the weather's shaping up for a great home game against Seattle this weekend.
I love it. You just quickly went to the sun is out and everything's good.
What we're gonna do today.
We're gonna move on. I mean, honestly, if we could just start the show with our guest talking about Seattle, which, we had the better of last year. That feels much more exciting than maybe the first half of the show. But no, seriously, doing really well. Excited about our guest today. He's been covering the team for years. Fun fact, I also see him at Killers concerts quite often, which is pretty cool. So with that, I'll let you introduce our guest.
Yeah, I've also got a fun fact about him that I've come upon in the press box once or twice. Pierre Noujaim, Fox 9 sports reporter, joining us today for the first time. Welcome into the show, Pierre. My fun fact, you are the only reporter that I've seen watching WrestleMania in the press box, so you are a man after my own heart there.
Listen, you can't pass up WrestleMania. You just can't do it. You can't. I've been watching wrestling ever since I was a young kid. I don't watch it as often as I get to these days, but I still keep up with it. But listen, I can multitask. If I couldn't multitask, I wouldn't be a very good journalist, I think. So that's why I like to hang my hat on.
What's your press situation for SummerSlam when it comes to US Bank Stadium this summer?
Well, this is kind of interesting timing for me because my wife is actually due in July.
Oh, nice.
With our first kid, so we're super excited about that. So 2 or 3 weeks after that, SummerSlam rolls around. I'm supposed to be on paternity leave, but I wonder if I can maybe scale that back for a week because 2 nights of SummerSlam at US Bank Stadium, I cannot miss this. I can't. So we'll see what happens. But
Pierre, is this your first?
This is going to be our first.
You're talking like this is your first kid. So yeah. We'll see where that goes, Pierre. We'll see.
Yeah. Hopefully I can record the conversation with my wife, trying to convince her to let me go out for a couple nights with a 3-week-old in her hand. So yeah, that should be a great conversation.
Couple weeks in, I don't think you'll want to because you'll be so exhausted.
You're probably right.
All right, we got plenty to discuss outside of wrestling, which I could go on for hours and hours on wrestling talk. And but we've got plenty to discuss. Obviously, we'll talk about the disappointing loss at the weekend, Manny, but plenty across Major League Soccer to discuss, especially last night, which is where I want to start. Some incredible results across Concacaf Champions Cup action. Toluca knocking out San Diego, coming back from a 1-goal deficit after the first leg. San Diego getting another red card because that's what they do in Concacaf Champions Cup action now is just constantly get red cards, but they lose 4-0. They are out to one of the best teams in Mexico. As you said last week, that's not a team to shy away from in the second leg here.
Yeah, no, it surprised me too, though, because I thought it was one of the guttiest performances I've seen by an MLS team in a while against a Mexican team when they got that result in San Diego against a team that was up a man for over 80 minutes. And I thought they played outstanding, aggressive, kind of attacking soccer, which is rare when you're down a man for that long. So I was not expecting that kind of blowout. I thought that would be a much closer game, and it still was close. I mean, the first goal didn't come till after the 50th minute. I think they got 3 in that 10-minute span that really put the game to bed for San Diego. But it's another reminder that as we build and grow into playing against Mexican teams, it is very tough to get results in Mexico. The travel, the altitude, the fields, the stadiums are just a little bit different. So it's still an area where, I think we still got 3 MLS teams left, but it's a reminder that they're not tough. So, I mean, they're not easy to get results.
Yeah, a couple other MLS teams out. Vancouver out after losing to Seattle. We'll talk about that one in a little bit. Philadelphia out after a 1-1 draw with Club America yesterday.
A
America
little
goes
closer, by the way. That
yeah.
Philly game of battle. I mean, I know Philly still hasn't won yet this year, but that was probably their best game of the year and their best performance in terms of it might be good that they're out now and they have to really focus on how they're going to kind of dig out of the slow start they've had.
That's a team that definitely needed a good performance after a couple of rough weeks in league play. And then the surprising one, Miami out against Nashville, 1-1 draw there. That's all the goals that would be celebrated in that one. And it was Nashville going through on away goals differences. Pierre, I don't know if you watched that one, but Miami going out against Nashville this early in the Concacaf Champions Cup action. I don't think many people had that considering how well Miami's been playing this season.
I actually did not get a chance to watch it, but I did see the result. And if I'm not mistaken, did I see that Messi scored his 900th goal
He did.
in the process as well? So I know everybody's hoping that maybe he's got enough juice left in those legs to score another 100, maybe score 1,000 in MLS. I know that'd be a nice feather in the cap for the league to have Messi do that. But I did see the result. But yeah, that a little bit of a surprise. But I mean, as we know, we saw Nashville a couple of weeks ago, and we know what Nashville is certainly capable of. And Hani Mukhtar is one of my favorite guys to watch in the league, and for good reason. So a bit of a surprise for Miami, but listen, all the credit to Nashville. I think they've been a solid team to begin the season all around.
Yeah, you let Nashville hang around long enough, Manny. They're gonna get a couple goals on you with the attacking front that they have, and they were able to do that. It was kind of a messy, kind of hockey style goal. It wasn't the cleanest goal in the world for Nashville, but it's enough to get them through to the next round.
Yeah, listen, I think it was a seismic result last night. Within almost, I would say, the global brand of Miami and global soccer in terms of they had put their flag down that they wanted to win Concacaf Champions Cup. That was their goal this year. They want to build that brand into a global brand, and they said we are going to win this tournament. This will put us into the Club World Cup. This will put us into the Club World Championships. And I think Nashville is just a darn good team, and this front three has laid their own gauntlet down. This combination of Sturridge, Mukhtar, and Espinoza, all kind of different types of players. One's kind of more of a crosser. One's more of a run in the box finisher, and one's a great creator. So it was a great result, great night for Nashville. I'm a little bit more, to me, the storyline is Miami, though, just because how much they kind of publicly talked about winning this tournament was one of their biggest goals this year. And for them to be out so early has got to be a bitter pill to swallow. So I was joking, and I have to get an AFCON moment here because yesterday, 58 days later, Morocco was awarded what
a wild situation.
Yeah, it's insane. I actually watched that game live. I thought it was the craziest game live. So it probably is the right kind of craziness of AFCON soccer. But I'm stealing somebody else's joke, and it was that maybe Don Garber will come across and somehow change this result last night for Messi Miami because it's devastating for them. Again, this was their big goal, and credit to Nashville. This is why you play the games. Messi with an early goal. You think Miami's going to go on, and I think they've taken care of Nashville in the Leagues Cup final a couple years ago. They've really had their number. So it was just a really compelling game last night.
Yeah, some intriguing stuff there, and it'll be interesting to see how far Nashville can take it because, as Pierre, you said, they've got a really good team this season. We saw that a couple weeks ago from Minnesota, and it'll be interesting to see how far they can go in the Concacaf Champions Cup, and I think they should be after knocking out Miami and playing as well as they did, I think they should be up there among the favorites left in the tournament. Across the league, Manny, the game I wanted to start off with you is the one that I texted you about at the weekend. Peter Musa, just a true number 9, one of the best number 9s in this league, single-handedly rescuing Dallas a point with the hat trick against San Diego at the weekend. San Diego up 2-0 early, and then Peter Musa just does it all by himself, essentially, and drags Dallas kicking and screaming to a 3-3 draw.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably putting the most true number 9 in the league right now, I would say, in terms of just his size, his scoring ability. He really makes good runs in the box. And, I think Dallas is one of those teams where it's still a home tie. They like to get a win, although San Diego's playing so well. Has really shown that Farrington and Musa, those two up top, might be really dangerous for the rest of the year. And ultimately coming back a couple times and getting a tie at home like that will feel like a win for them.
San Diego still undefeated, as you said, on the season, 3-0-1 on the year. Pierre, they just continue to be a team that, yeah, they're only in their second season, but they have put together a really good squad, a really good organization there, and they continue to impress. They're essentially the Vegas Golden Knights of MLS right now, and where they had the impressive debut season, they've just continued building on that.
What a great comparison! Like seriously,
Yeah.
what a great comparison that is. And really, when you look at their team, it's eye popping. Really, the goal differential. What is it? 14-1, 14-4, and one against. I think it is. And they have been nothing short of impressive all throughout, ever since they joined the league. And of course, the Loons fans all know all too well, of course, what happened in the postseason last year. But I still go back to I don't know what Manny thinks, but I still think about that game sometimes. I was like, man, that game was still right there for the taking for Minnesota United in the postseason last year. But
yeah, I thought it was. I mean, listen, I'd rather talk about that all day than what we're later down the pipeline. But I thought we played a great game. I think game plan was great. We kept it tight. We kept Dreyer in check. They ran out of a lot of ideas. We had just won there a couple of weeks before too, so they were starting to think about that. And we were close. We didn't quite have a few moments we could have got a goal. I think in the early second half, we kind of started to take the game over. But to your point, they're outstanding. They
really are. I mean, they're going to be forced to reckon with all season long. I don't think this is going to be like a one-hit wonder from what we saw last year. I mean, clearly in the first 4 games, this team could very well be the best team in the Western Conference. I mean, we can't really say that for sure, because when you look at the top of the West, I mean, it's absolutely loaded with great teams and a couple of surprising teams. I know we might touch on a couple teams later on. I've got thoughts on 2 teams, one in particular that is not near, I wouldn't say near and dear in my heart, but I'm very familiar with them. But yeah, San Diego, what a group.
Whoa, we can't just do that tease. And we're in there now. We're talking West. Let's talk it.
Well, as Manny knows, I'm from Northern California. So, I keep my eyes on the Quakes from afar, and the Quakes are off to a pretty good start. But the funny thing is like, I hardly recognize this team. What are these 1-0 results the Quakes are playing in? I'm so used to this team going down 2-0 in the 35th minute, and then suddenly in the 80th minute, they've either found a way to get the go-ahead goal, the tying goal, or they're down 3-2 in the 90th minute and somehow off a set piece get a 3-3 tie. That's the kind of Quakes chaos I'm used to. I'm not used to these 1-0 results from the Quakes, Manny. Not at all.
The Bruce Arena effect right there. No, I think I think it is exactly right. I think they've had a great defensive start, and that's why they have the record they have.
Yeah.
I think they're probably a little disappointed they couldn't score at home and maybe get a tie or get the result against Seattle, but it's a great start for them. There's no doubt about it. They've really done a good job this year of deciding that being more balanced on defense and offense is a way to win in this league for sure.
Three guys with 2 goals each. That's it. 6 goals in 4 games with 3 guys being your goal scorers. And you said it perfectly. The balance that they have right now is unquakes like from what I am so used to seeing from that organization.
And a great start for Timo Werner. Like again, he's not going to be just a goal scorer. He's going to have to contribute assists, because that's kind of the knock on him at the European level. He couldn't quite be a consistent goal scorer. So you got to find other ways to contribute in the field, and it's an exciting signing, I think, for them as well. I think it adds a lot of stature to that roster.
They've quickly made everybody forget about the front office blunder of letting just Christian Espinoza walk in the offseason and not picking up his contract. And 3 clean sheets in a row, and then you lose narrowly to Seattle at the weekend. But they've quickly made everybody forget about that, Manny.
I just like how you brought it up again, and for Pierre as well. I mean, being from North Carolina, it's a big blunder. I mean, he scored the go-ahead goal for Nashville to go through. So, yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's going to go away, by the way. I don't think that'll really go away.
No, if Nashville keep playing well, it's still going to be there. Elsewhere across the league, one final note I want to get to. Atlanta getting a big win over Philadelphia, a team that we've already talked about. But that Philadelphia team really continues to struggle here early on this season, Manny. But Atlanta getting a very much-needed win at home this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, with Tata Martino and that kind of not a lot of roster moves, but trying to say, hey, we're going to be better this year, and they've had a horrible start. And I think that was a comprehensive win at home. I thought they start from the whistle. They were like, we've got to get 3 points and get off and running. So we'll see where they go from that. I thought Almiron looked much more lively than it did the first couple of games. Moranchuk seemed, a little bit more dangerous, the connection of those two. So hard to tell where that team's going to go, but there's a lot of money in that roster, so there'll be a lot of expectations to improve on a really slow start.
Yeah, absolutely. We had some team news yesterday as well that I want to get to, and one of these guys you know very well, Manny, Danny Cruz and Tom Sohn.
Tommy Stone.
Tom Stone, joining the club as assistant coaches for Cameron Knowles' coaching staff. What do you know about these guys? What do they bring to Cameron Knowles' coaching staff?
Yeah, I'll start with Tommy Stone because that's a little bit more of my generation, and he's a little older than me. But I played with Tommy, and I played against Tommy, and so I've been around for many decades. He's been in the coaching circles for a long time. He's done really well, and is really somebody who's connected to this area. His father lived here for a while. He's lived in Hudson for a while, and I think he's just excited to kind of be in and around this area, which he calls home now, anyways. And adding some experience like him, who's got decades of soccer experience and working for so many good coaches. Just a great guy. Excited to have him. I'm excited to have just a little bit more older experience on the staff too. And then you got Danny Cruz, who, it's interesting from a MLS perspective in that Danny had been a really good player, played for us for 1 year for Minnesota United. And he also went on to a great coaching career. And I think he thinks his best pathway is in MLS and not USL, where he's been outstanding. I think he's one of the more respected coaches in USL. So I think there'll be some eyebrows raised about this move versus staying in USL, but I think he's looking at our club as a great club to work for. I feel like we're getting a lot of good hires based on who we are and what kind of club we are, which is really encouraging. I think for like behind the scenes when we have to talk about a tough result, in the bigger picture, there's a lot of good things going on in the club.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the overall construction of the coaching staff, Pierre, you've got 3 former head coaches at different levels joining Cameron Knowles, who's a first-team head coach. And I think that speaks a lot of volumes to what he brings and what he's looking for in his coaching staff.
Yeah, no question about it. And of course, Josh Wolf is the other one that was brought in the offseason. And I was actually personally kind of excited to see Josh Wolf join the staff, not only because I watched him play for Team USA growing up, but also my brother-in-law actually spent some time in the Austin organization with the youth development program. So he knows Josh Wolf and Owen Wolf a little bit. So he texted me right away saying, "Oh, you got to say hi to Josh for me," and stuff like that. So that was pretty cool to see. Yeah, I think, like Manny said, I think it's a great collection of minds really on the bench. And even though this team is off to a little bit of a slow start, and it seems like we're going through a little bit of a transition phase with the philosophy and the tactics that this team wants to try to put together for the rest of the season, it's still really early. And there's still plenty of runway for this coaching staff to kind of get together, put their brains together, and figure this thing out. So I think, they said 2 heads are better than 1. In this case, you've got certainly more than that. So I think that this coaching staff, or really this team, I think is in good hands with this coaching staff all around.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else you want to mention from the weekend, Manny, before we get into the rough part of this podcast?
Yeah, I mean, you're the host, and Pierre, I'm trying to think if there's any other games that we missed.
I got a team. I got one. I got one team that is kind of catching. But who's looked pretty spicy? Salt Lake.
Yeah.
After their first match, I think Jonathan, was it Seattle or Vancouver? Their first match they lost. I forget.
Yep, 1-0. They lost in Vancouver.
Yeah.
And then ever since then, they've looked pretty darn good. For kind of a fun team to watch. I don't know if they'll be able to keep it up, but I mean, so far, Salt Lake is a team that has my attention in the early going part of the season, no doubt about it.
Yeah, and very much like Red Bulls, it's a little bit of a youth movement there too.
Yeah,
a lot of young energy on the field. You're right. I agree with that. They looked very good over the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. They're a fun team to watch, and they're going to be a really tough competition in the Western Conference. All right, let's jump into this one. Let's just rip this Band-Aid off. 6-0 loss for the Loons this weekend in Vancouver. Vancouver, it was another quick start for the opponent. Loons kind of slow out of the gates, and Vancouver, a team that we know is really good over the past year and a half under Jesper Sorensen. He has just done an incredible job up there, and they capitalized on every single mistake Minnesota made, Manny. That's kind of the overarching point for me of the match, is that Minnesota just made too many mistakes, and Vancouver were just lethal, capitalizing on counterattacks and just making Minnesota pay whenever the defense got a little bit out of position.
Yeah, I mean, it was a tough day. There's no doubt about it. And again, the good thing is, and I think you mentioned, particularly when I talk about the first 4 to 6 games of a year, I really think the results are important, but what's more important is kind of the reflection of like how the game went and where we're going from here and how does the team look building into this. And I think the challenge for this one is the honesty. It was a real loss, meaning that it wasn't close. It wasn't just defense. It wasn't just offense. It partly wasn't just our mistakes. It was a combination of, tactically we got a little bit too spread out quickly. So were we going to high press this game? Or were we going to sit deep? And we were playing against a team that right now is firing all cylinders for the last year and a half or year or so with whatever lineup they put out. This is a team that beat us last year 3-0 at home, resting guys for Champions League. So they got us again. And it should hurt because this one I felt like it was not only our worst scoreline loss, but it was one of those losses where we do have to say, hey, we got to make sure we're going to be aligned in how we're going to play, how we're going to compete in this league, and how we're going to get results.
Yeah. Pierre, when you watch that match and you think back on it, what were your overall takeaways and kind of what it means after the first 4 games of the season with what you've seen from Minnesota United?
Well, I mean, I'll go with the latter first. The thing that stands out to me so far, really, with this team, the one major thing that jumps out is this team through 4 games has only held a lead for 30 minutes, I think, through 4 games. This team is constantly fighting uphill every game. We're fortunate to get away with the draw in the opening match. I mean, obviously the win against Cincinnati, but this team is constantly fighting uphill, and that's a problem. I think that's a problem. They got to try to find a way to score early, play with the lead, and be able to kind of play a little more freely, a little more loosely. But in regard to the Vancouver game, I thought, especially in that first half, Sebastian Berhalter, I thought, was absolutely sensational in that game, really controlling the pace of play, scores the penalty, but dishes out a couple of assists in that first half as well. I thought Sebastian Berhalter did whatever he wanted in that first half, and Minnesota United really didn't seem to really have much of an answer. And it can't be, Manny and Jonathan, I think you guys probably would both agree, it can't be as simple as Michael Boxall not being back there to kind of control the pace of play. He's an awfully important player along the back line for this team. There's no question about it. But, I mean, for things to get out of hand the way that they did against Vancouver, I really don't think it could be as simple as Michael Boxall not being in the back, trying to control the damage for this team. And I didn't really think Jefferson Diaz looked all that great. Didn't think Kyle Duncan looked all that great. I know the formations and the tactics kind of change, with guys who are available, like Boxy. If he's available, the formation might look a little bit different. But it's been a rough start. And first and foremost, like I said off the top, I love to see this team play with the lead at some point. That would be a step in the right direction.
Manny?
Yeah, I mean, Pierre's got some great comments there, and I think if we're talking about how good is Vancouver and how well did they do, that's a fair argument. I would say there was 4 or 5 players that were just insanely outstanding. Starting with Berhalter, he's exactly right. They controlled the midfield. He and Kubas, defensively, offensively, they dictated the tempo. There wasn't a moment in the game where I was like, oh, we have some ways of attack, so we're dictating tempo. They were just all over us. I thought Sabi had a great game, really put Devin under a lot of pressure, getting him behind, particularly early. Brian White was outstanding between the 2 center backs and making good runs in the box. And then a back line that I thought was going to be a little softer and kind of chunky. You got Laborda had a great game, just really, really made a back line of like I said, a group that I thought we could get after, but there was not one point in the game where they did. So I think when I say how well they played, my brain, because I'm with Minnesota United, goes back to us. And I just think from the get-go, we got caught a little bit thinking that we were going to high press without actually being committed as a group to high press. And so there's a risk reward when you high press. And the risk is there because you're stretching the game. The reward is if you get that group and you get compact, then you can make the game in that space of the field that you really want to get the ball and then to create chances. From minute 1, the opposite happened. We high pressed and they just passed through it so easily. And the next thing you know, the waves of attack starts. And then you give up an early goal. And so now you're like, okay, we're high pressing still because we're down a goal, but there's no organized to really do it in a way that the group was quite committed to. And that's tough. Like, again, I'm sure the staff and the players, they're not trying to do that. It's just one of those games where we maybe shifted the tactics, trying something, which I like doing early in the season. I actually really like trying it and be like, okay, if we're going to do this again, we got to be a little bit more organized. We got to do this, or maybe the personnel has to be a little bit different. I certainly, there'll be a lot of discussions. Like I said, I think this club has a lot of great historical pride. I don't say it lightly to our fan base. When you lose your biggest scoreline ever, that's a real loss, and that's a real heartbreak within the club. There's no doubt. It's not just because it's early in the season, we're okay with it. I think there's a lot of hard, tough discussions about, that game. I still think there's a lot of positives in the preseason, and even still probably the toughest start to the season of any team in the league is us. So I do think that has to be taken account, that like if you take it away, Nashville and Vancouver away are probably in Vegas odds very much going to be losses. But at the same time, I don't want to sugarcoat to anybody that I don't think the club thinks that's an acceptable way for us to compete in this league. And the result, was fair. I mean, it was a fair result, and that's got to hit us hard. And it's going to push, hopefully, our coaching staff to ask a lot of tough questions about the tactics, about the player personnel, and about what our philosophy is going forward, given that we've talked about getting a little bit higher line this year. And does that mean the higher line's a lot higher, or does it mean that? And again, ultimately for me, as somebody who's been in and around it, I'm okay with all of it. I just need teams to be compact. Wherever you're going to be in the field, we got to be compact, because then I know it's not easy for the other team to get through and get chances.
I want to get back to the boxy thing in a little bit, but one of the big notes going into this match, Pierre, was some changes, some notable changes in the starting lineup. You had Padelford in for Marcanic, Harvey in at right center back, and then Kyle Duncan getting the start for Bongi. Obviously, the game didn't go the way that the club would have wanted, that the squad would have wanted. So how do you analyze what we saw and what you can pick apart from that match and move forward with it after such a disappointing result?
Well, I never like taking Marcanic off the field. I certainly understand. I certainly understand. The kind of change in look. I think Marcanic has just been such a great contributor to this club over the last year. And yesterday, guys, I was actually talking with our colleague Andy Greeter, and I were out at Gopher Pro Day yesterday, and he and I were chit chatting about the Loons off to the side. And he pointed out something to me that I had not realized. So shout out Andy Greeter for helping us, with a little conversation on the podcast. He pointed out to me that Bongi Longwane doesn't have a shot all season long. Not a shot on goal. He doesn't even have a shot attempt in 4 games, which absolutely blew my mind. Man, I'd see Manny's exasperated face.
Yeah.
And I actually did not realize that until he told me. And I thought to myself, how in the world is that even possible? Man, I know that Bongi is moving back from right back. He moves up to right mid, kind of, the transition of going back to that position.
But Pierre, great. You realize he's playing in higher spaces this year than he was last year.
Yeah. No. I know.
So that's a pretty amazing stat.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about. So I mean, I don't know. I wasn't at practice or at training earlier this week, so I didn't get a chance to ask Cam, the question. I don't know, if Bongi sat because of an early lack of production or if he just wanted to mix it up. But it's crazy to me that Bongi Longwane has not been more involved, in the attacking third. And that's what just to point that out. I still can't believe I'm saying it out loud that this is a thing. But some of the names. It's just, after a game like that, guys, I think if you've ever seen the movie Miracle, after Team USA loses 10-3 to the Russians, and Herb Brooks says to Jimmy Craig, right now it's everybody's net. We just lost. They just scored 10 goals. Right now it's everybody's net. That's kind of what it feels like right now with this team. It doesn't matter who's on the field, who starts, who finishes. You just gave up 6 goals. If we can find a combination of guys that works, I don't care who it is, but it's got to be a lot better than what we saw, no doubt about it.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. I mean, that's one of the talking points Dan and I had on the broadcast as we were getting to the later points of the games. Like, you can't look at what this performance was at the weekend against Vancouver and pinpoint any one person who went wrong. It was an entire squad kind of let down there, and you need an entire squad to pick it up and and find different answers on Sunday against Seattle, Manny. How do you, excuse me, as a coach, how do you bounce back from this? What do you tell the squad? What's the next week of practice look like after a loss like that?
Yeah, I mean it's not easy because you're building back a lot of phases that you kind of worked on in preseason to build your organization. And it's fine. Like I said, it's one of those ones where there's got to be a lot of kind of individual discussion of accountability and then group habits discussion of accountability, and there's a lot of phases of the game that struggled. So it's not just a normal week where it can be just one phase because, defensively, our back four really struggled with their box defending and with their positioning. Our two center midfielders, really struggled with not losing the ball or losing the ball in bad spots where Vancouver could come back and repress and recounter and get good chances. So, and then offensively, we struggled to get out. And then we also struggled to get phases of attack going. So, in the end, it's as long as you say that, I think, which is what the staff has done, and I think the club is very honest and always accountable about, the good and the bad. I think then you start to really get back to like, okay, well, we have a new game now, and it's just one of 34, and we have Seattle, a very good team, and how are we going to start to game plan? And then how do you build that into making sure that you're going to be better next week? So, ultimately, I think there's got to be a little couple of blowout sessions. I do think you've got to up the tempo of the sessions a little bit to give guys an ability to just blow out and get their own frustration and energy out. And then you've got to kind of like balance how crazy you go with the tactics versus how do you get the guys to just get a couple good habits going individually and collectively to make sure that we're ready for Seattle because we got a really good team that just beat Vancouver last night, by the way, coming to town. So it's a lot. That's why I said this is not easy. It's not an easy response when you have that kind of comprehensive performance the other way and not doing well. It's a lot. But at the good same time, I love that we have a game and it's not an international break because it means the guys can prepare now. Their head has to forget last weekend. They've got to be a goldfish in some senses. I mean, the scoreline. But they've got to get ready for a team in Seattle. We've got to play well if we're going to get a result.
Jonathan, if I could, say one more thing too. I know Manny would love nothing more than for us to keep talking about this game, but the couple more things that just kind of jump out at me, with the way and the pace of the game was going. Triantis hits the post, and even if that, I thought to myself, even if that ball goes, an inch to the right and goes in, and it make it 3-1. I was thinking, okay, maybe you're thinking to yourself, you got a little bit of life, maybe you can regroup. I don't think that they were ever, even if that ball goes in, I don't think they were just ever in this game. I don't think that even would have made a difference even at that point. The other thing that surprised me too, and I know a lot has been made about the possession statistics from last year, despite the low possession numbers, the high production that Minnesota United was able, to come away with all throughout last year. And personally, I've always found the possession statistic to be an overrated statistic in most regard. I think it's relevant in some cases, but I was shocked when I looked at the final numbers from that game too. It was nearly 50-50 in possession, and Minnesota was outshot at a 2-1 margin. I was from watching the game, especially that first half, it felt like the field was absolutely tilted. So I was shocked to see that Minnesota even finished at a near 50% possession number, which I don't know if that makes the loss better or worse. But to me, when I saw that it was nearly 50-50 and you were outshot 2-1 and you lose 6-0, I was like, whoa, I would not have guessed that if somebody did not show me the final stat sheet.
Yeah, it was just an incredibly efficient day for Vancouver when they did have the ball. And Minnesota, just as we've alluded to and talked about a couple times, they struggled to create anything. They struggled to get the ball past midfield. It felt like a lot of that game, the Vancouver midfield did a really good job of hassling and taking away the ball and just winning 50-50s all over the place. But that kind of brings up the last question I have off this game. And after, Manny, you and I have talked about this, 4 games, kind of what you want to see. And before you start feeling out what a team is going to be for the season, it feels like Minnesota is going through some growing pains with these tactics. What are your takeaways from the first 4 games of this team that you've seen to start this season as we kind of evolve the system from as we've talked about and has been talked about nationally quite a bit, the uber defensive approach from last season, now wanting the ball a little bit higher, now wanting a little bit more of the possession. Is this just growing pains? Do you just have to just jump in and accept that those growing pains are going to happen, that it's going to be a rough start? Or is there a different approach here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important we remind ourselves Dane St. Clair, Robin Lode, Tani Olashevi, we've lost some big pieces. And every year is a new year where you build the group and you build a model for how you're going to be competitive in a very, very, very competitive league. So I guess my answer would be I don't want to overreact from one game, and I don't want to overreact from playing two of the best teams in the league away and not looking great. But I think it's a big month for the club. I think it's a big month for us because we've got some really tough games, one at home and then two on the road against the Galaxy in San Diego, where we have to build a little bit of like a commitment of what our identity is going to be to compete. And I think the unnervingness that we're not there right now because we didn't have that same identity the first two games that we had the last two, or particularly against Vancouver. I think Nashville was a little bit different. So I think there's a roster there that I think can become very competitive. I really do. So I think now we've got to push some individual guys to have better performances, and the group has to maybe think about how they want to, compete week in and week out. And maybe not, it's not the same. Maybe tactically the staff has to be a little bit more flexible, that the opponent they're playing, they're going to have to be a little bit more realistic about what style they're going to want to play.
Build the season of your dreams with the 2026 Flex Pack. Create your own partial plan with anywhere from 5 to 16 home games to lock in your spot and dodge ticket fees. More information at MNUFC.com/tickets. Yeah, absolutely. Anything else you guys want to mention from this game before we mercifully move on to previewing the Seattle game?
I think Manny's all talked out, if you ask me. So I think
It's tough. It's tough.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we've only had a couple of these kind of results. One, we've been doing this podcast, Manny. It's the LA game in the playoffs a couple years ago, and then this one are really the two
I also
biggest.
get nervous overreacting just because if you guys don't remember, this is our first time in well over a year that we've had back-to-back losses
Yeah.
as a
yeah,
club.
yeah,
That's pretty impressive.
yeah.
And they'll have to find a way to bounce back against a very good opponent in a nice vein of form in Seattle after they come off a 2-1 win over Vancouver in Concacaf Champions Cup action. Playing outside of their normal home, playing about 4 hours away from Seattle. I felt like I was going to get some height sickness from watching that camera angle last night of the Concacaf Champions Cup game in Spokane. But that was an interesting game to watch. One thing that I've taken away from this team, Manny, is that they play with a little bit less possession than they've had in the past. And we just talking about possession for Minnesota. They don't really, it seems like they're not really, when looking at their possession numbers, they're not really high on having a lot of possession. They'll hit you on the counterattack and they'll be lethal, mainly because Paul Rothrock's just been outstanding to start the year. But this seems like a team that kind of took a couple of lessons from Minnesota last season in that epic 3-game series and are kind of utilizing them and sitting back a little bit more defensively and relying on Jackson Reagan in the defense and then just hitting on the counterattack.
Yeah, I think they've been very pragmatic. I think they've been very just kind of ruthless with like they're taking the game, what it's giving them, and then finding the moments to really hurt teams. And you're correct. I think it is Rothrock who's really being the hungry one who wants to drive forward and drive in. Jesus Ferreira looks a little sharper than he did last year too. He looks a little bit more comfortable now within that group, and he's been a little bit more of the playmaker than it says as opposed to scoring goals. And then you got Reagan and Tolo back there. They've just signed a young kid, Lopez, from their second team. He's 23. He's not young. I actually played with my son at Duke, so I get a little shout out there. So I'm excited for him. But it's Seattle always has an organization to them that is tough to break down, and that allows them to kind of think about how they want to solve the game offensively.
Yeah, this is A very interesting one for obviously a number of storylines, Pierre. This one at 1:30, kickoff on Sunday, Apple TV, Fox, and we got the radio broadcast free on ESPN 1500. Your prediction, or I guess projections for how this one plays out. Obviously, Seattle
Oh,
coming in
wow.
on good
You're
form.
going to that already? You're going to
Yeah.
put Pierre on the spot? Like, I
Putting
thought we
him
were
on the
just going to
spot.
talk about the game. Next thing you know, you're like, Pierre,
I want the projections. I want to see how he thinks this one will play out, because you got two very different teams and two very different kinds of form right now. Minnesota coming off a pair of really tough, really bad losses, and Seattle coming in off a good Concacaf Champions Cup win, and then they've been really good in league play so far, just losing the once, I believe, the one time, I
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah, and the way it's kind of all laid out, like Jonathan said, I mean, the arrow seems to be pointing towards Seattle. I mean, let's be perfectly honest. With the last couple of weeks now, things have played out, and traditionally Minnesota has struggled at Seattle. That has traditionally been a house of horrors for them, even though they won their last year. What was it, 3-2? Was that a 3-2 result last year?
3-2. I think we're up 3-1. Comprehensive.
Yeah.
Comprehensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they slayed a little bit of the dragon there with winning in Seattle, and of course how the playoff series turned out. But with the way things have gotten off this year, Manny actually said the name. Jesus Ferreira, in terms of as good as Rothrock has been, I always try to keep my eye out for those playmakers. Manny said the magic word, the playmakers out there in the middle of the field that can make things happen, a la what we saw with Sebastian Berhalter in that game against Vancouver just a couple of days ago. I think Ferreira has really had a very nice start to the season for them. There's no question about it. And I think my hope is that Minnesota has learned from that loss against Vancouver and, tries to take some of that playmaking ability away, because if they don't do that, it could be another long afternoon for Minnesota. Even, if you're asking me for a prediction, as much as I want to say that Minnesota, listen, I'll say this: if Minnesota can come away with a point in this match, I think that's going to be a great result for them. I think coming away with that minimum of point is a good result. You take that point, you come back home for next week's match, you get a chance to play again at Allianz Field. I think that would be a good result for Minnesota.
Yeah. And how much, when you look back at these two teams and kind of going back to that 3-game series last year in the playoffs, Pierre, how much do you think that kind of weighs into how this game has played out? Who does that affect more in this matchup, Seattle or Minnesota?
I love that question, and Manny was the player, so he probably can probably chime in on this a little bit better than I can. I didn't play at the level that Manny did. I made it as far as high school, and that was it. But if I walked off of Allianz Field that night, I still remember it, and I thought to myself, if you play for Seattle, if you're a member of Seattle's organization, that is one heck of a loss to try to get over. That was one of the more devastating losses I've seen a team have to take. I've seen a team score while being down a man. I have never, ever seen a team down a man, down 2 goals, score twice to tie a match, and then eventually, with the way the PK shootout went, the roller coaster ride that PK shootout went.
Yeah.
And as much as many of us probably might not like the best of 3 format, and I know the players and coaches kind of talked about that last year, but for better or worse, if you're sitting in the league office, what better example to have than to continue the 3-game series than what we saw last year between Minnesota and Seattle? It was epic drama. And obviously it was just a magical result for Minnesota. But like I said, that's one of those losses for Seattle that you have to sit with that all off season. Oof, to have to sit with that for 6 months is just crushing. I would have to imagine they haven't forgotten about that. I can't imagine they have.
Well, I think it was Brian Schmetzer who said that was one of the toughest losses, if not the toughest loss of his career last year.
Yeah.
Manny. So that's a result that obviously will be hanging over them. And how do you think that impacts them on Sunday?
Well, I like the way Pierre just said that. I think we've got to get back to that moxie of, we just swept Seattle last year, and then we punched them in the face in the playoffs. And ultimately, we one of the bigger MLS games in history in terms of being down 2-0, down a man, and 3 unanswered goals. And Seattle had to scrape to get it to a PK shootout. So somehow, some way, we need to, not like have a panic intensity, but we need to find that moxie and make sure when we're on the field that we are having intensity, whether it's on our defensive side of shape and structure and closing guys down and being really tough to get by and really make sure Seattle understands that this is going to be an extension of last year. That you're going to come to Allianz Field, you're going to play Minnesota United now. What we showed last year in Vancouver is not us. And then on the flip side, we've got to find our kind of rhythm and moxie offensively. And again, I think Seattle has been very organized and very structured this year. So some of that is going to be not just in the run of play. I think we're going to have to get back to being hungry for set pieces. I think we're going to have to get back to like every set piece, every play is a chance for one phase or a second phase of offensive chances. So it's all those little things, but I like how Pierre said it. I think there is a thing where we have to say, listen, we had a really big year in Seattle and probably psychologically been damaged. By the way, Seattle has something with Real Salt Lake, just so you guys remember. I don't know.
Yeah.
They've had their own problems at different teams. And so I think this is like a big time for us to kind of remind ourselves of how we kind of really went against them last year. And this team has changed, but it's also a team that has a lot of good players that can play well at home.
Jonathan, I just want to chime in real quick. I made the mistake. I looked at the sheet wrong. I thought we were in Seattle. We're going to be playing in St. Paul. That was my mistake. So apologies for that.
Sunday afternoon. Yeah.
Sunday afternoon should be decentish weather, not the 70 that we're going to have on Saturday, but should be still decent. Not like their home opener where it was freezing cold all afternoon.
I've just been so used to seeing this. They've been on the road pretty much almost the entire month to start the season. I'm just so used to them not being at home. I thought we were on the road just one more time. So my mistake.
I think we're going to have warm weather finally too. Can I like if you want to get like move on from Vancouver? We had the snowstorm and we had the cold front. 70 Saturday, 50 Sunday. I mean,
yeah.
I'm pulling up my trusty Fox 9 weather app right now.
Yeah.
I'm looking at myself to see what we've got going. I know it's going to be a great weekend for us here.
Yeah, it should be a nice weekend.
73 on Saturday. Oh my God! And then 41 on Sunday. What do we do?
That snow's going to be all gone. There's going to be no snow.
Love us a Midwest spring.
Yeah.
Going to this game and thinking about it, and my question is defensively, what do we expect to see from this club? Who's going to line up for the Loons in the backfield? We talked about it a little bit earlier. Michael Boxall still not back. I don't know his status for Sunday, but how do you fill that hole, Manny? Because obviously the defensive woes over the past two games, 9 goals allowed in those two games, aren't just completely down to Michael Boxall. Those are two very good attacking teams that have a lot of attacking talent, but there was a lot of mistakes that we haven't seen from this club defensively over the past 2 years. Over the last 2 weeks that we haven't seen over the past 2 years. So how do you fill that hole without Michael Boxall?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's positional discussion about the lineup in terms of who you play and who you don't. But then there's also like a little bit of like what is the best tactical formation to really, build a competitive game against Seattle. And that will bring up, the staff has a tough decision about they want to stick with the back 4 or back 5 and see how that goes. Or do you want to put an extra guy in the midfield so Triantis and Trapp maybe have a little better chance to win that midfield? So it's maybe looks like a little more like a 4-5-1 or 4-3-3. So a lot of big decisions this week. Ultimately, I think Seattle usually kind of plays a 4-2-3-1. So maybe add another midfielder to even up the midfield might be the way to go. Again, I don't quite know they have the answers, but I know that the very easy thing is the 4-4-2 kind of system we had last week in Vancouver really struggled. So again, I think there's going to be questions about the system. If we're going to go with the system, then we got to do some serious work this week to make sure that we don't have that same kind of getting stretched like we did in Vancouver last week.
I know it's 40 minutes in, and I know the league is beating down the door of the podcast booth here. Because we haven't talked about James Rodriguez making his debut in Vancouver, obviously overshadowed by the result. But what do you expect his involvement on Saturday, Pierre, after he gets his debut, has some really good moments, has a few good moments in that time, just obviously a little bit too far down and too far gone in the game to really make too big of an impact. But you could kind of see some sparks of what he can provide this team offensively.
Well, I think it kind of goes back to what we talked about a little bit earlier. And, if I'm Cameron Knowles, and I don't dare to try to pretend to be Cameron Knowles because he's a heck of a lot more qualified than I am. But Yeah, I have to think to myself, if James Rodriguez is fully fit, if he's fully fit and in condition and ready to go, I don't see why not in terms of starting him, because we go back to the discussion we had earlier. I'd like to see this team get off to a hotter start, play with the lead, and I think James Rodriguez gives you a good opportunity to do that. So if he's fully fit and he feels like he can be ready to go to play 65, 70 minutes, why not start him up top and let's see how that plays out. And there's also a little bit of an entertainment factor that goes into it. Listen, James Rodriguez is a big name. He's kind of a name that puts butts in the seats. So that's I think there's a couple different elements at play here with James Rodriguez. And I, first and foremost, I want to see this team play with a lead. I want to see them get off, pick up some momentum early and not have to constantly fight uphill and chase the game the way that they've had to do the last couple of weeks. So I think if James Rodriguez is fit, I would like to see him start the match and see how this team looks like with him starting a match, to see how it might all play out.
Manny, your thoughts on how James Rodriguez fit into what we saw a little bit at the end of the game last week, and then how you expect him, what you might want to see from him this weekend against Seattle?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all glass half full, sun is out. The reality is, obviously we had to get him up to fitness, and then you have to figure out how to get him in, and then he had the heel injury, so he couldn't play in Nashville, and so now you're going to play in Vancouver on turf, and you're trying to navigate both where his fitness level is and as well like where this injury is. And I thought he came out and looked insanely sharp. I mean, I just loved his touches. I mean, they were clean. They pushed the game forward a little bit. Again, a little deceiving at the scoreline, but it was by far the best phase of getting numbers forward and him really driving the attack and driving us forward to get chances in a game that, we really struggled to have anything. So I really enjoyed watching him and watching his touches. They were so clean and so effective. That'll never be a question for James. It'll be obviously mobility and his fitness, which is where it's at right now. So ultimately, he's a game changer. So if he's fit and ready to go, I think it'll be hard to not get him out there and see how this team functions with, kind of a world-class player who's on the tail end of his career. But I was certainly encouraged by what I saw in Vancouver. It was really fun to watch him.
And then to Pierre's point, Manny, what's the key to a faster start? Because we've talked about it over the first 4 weeks of this season in this podcast. The slower starts, it's 3 of 4 games that they've conceded a goal early on in the matches this season. How does this club get off to a better start, a faster start in this game against Seattle?
Yeah, it's the attention to detail to the little things. Ultimately, like I said, I want us to have a fast start by scoring, but we can't give up early goals. Like that's kind of where the shift is. If Pierre wants us to get an early lead, we've got to make sure we're from the first whistle, whether it's getting on the front foot, that means we have to be compact, getting numbers forward. If they get the possession of the ball quickly, we've got to make sure we have guys committed to tough defending to get through maybe a wave and attack to get us to take control of the game, the tempo. So again, there's no rest here. Like Seattle will punish us if we're not ready to play. And I expect this group and the staff to work really hard this week. Again, like I said, this was a tough loss for the club, but I also think there's some good opportunities and potentially James on the field might really start to spark us to get going and find that moxie on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, this is setting up for a very intriguing matchup. Sunday afternoon, 1:30 p.m. on Apple TV, on Fox, and as well as on 1500 ESPN on the radio side with Dan Terra and myself. 1 p.m. pre-match show for that starting on 1500 ESPN and the Score North mobile app. Guys, final thoughts from you guys, each of you guys. Pierre, I'll start with you on this match before I get a U.S. men's national team question to Manny that I know I want to ask him.
Well, even though I had the location wrong 10 minutes ago, I still kind of stand by my previous statement. I think getting a point and going in the right direction is still a good result for Minnesota. Obviously, you're at home, like Manny knows. Whenever you're at home, you want to win. If you're able to come away with 3 points, fantastic. We can put the last couple of weeks behind us and start moving forward. But I think with everything that we've talked about so far in the show, guys, in terms of new faces, tactical changes, getting used to a new coaching staff, those things kind of take time. And I know that fans aren't exactly the most patient bunch in the world. So I know that, if they walk off the field with a draw, they might kind of go, eh. But I think a draw after what we've seen over the last couple of weeks is an indication of progress to me and that this thing is starting to be turned around. If they are able to win and get 3 points, all the better. Great. But, at bare minimum, this team has to walk off the field with, at minimum, a draw, at minimum.
Yeah, Manny, and your final thoughts on this matchup and what we expect to see, and also the return of Hassani Dotson, the first time he's returned to Allianz Field since joining Seattle in the offseason.
Yeah, he's had some concussion protocol, so it'll be interesting to see whether he ends up coming. He had a good start. He had a couple really good games in Seattle, and I think had a goal that he scored that got called back. I just love sports because there's an uncertainty and a nervousness that should be there, and hopefully we use that uncertainty and nervous to push ourselves to respond in a way that reminds our club the work we do and reminds our fan base that we're hungry to win and we're hungry to be competitive. And that doesn't come easy. I mean, it comes against playing against a tough team and showing that you're ready to compete. And that's what my goal is, expectation is just, I think honestly, we didn't show the competitiveness that this club usually does. And that hurt a lot. And that's what I want to see this weekend. I want to make sure that we're walking off the field feeling like we're back to being a very, very competitive club in this league, and that we're excited to play every team because we're good, and we didn't show that last weekend, and we got a great opponent at home in front of our fans to kind of do that, and it's not easy. Sport's not easy, but that's why it's great.
Looking forward to a big bounce back performance this weekend for Minnesota United. All right, U.S. men's national team roster was just released this week. I want to get your thoughts on a couple of notes, Manny.
Yeah.
I want to start off with the most controversial. Gio Reyna hasn't played a match since January 19th, according to FB Reps. So it's been a while, but he still gets a call in. Your thoughts on him getting a call in? And as Mauricio Pochettino has said about this March roster, that this is going to be the group that he picks from for the World Cup. So your thoughts on him potentially being available for the World Cup and being in the squad for the World Cup, despite not playing a whole lot for his club?
Yeah, I just think we have to have the idea of him thinking about our creative players, which are so important for the engine of creating in a World Cup. I don't think this means he's on the roster. I think he'd be one of those guys who's in that more of a trialist to see. Well, I want to see really where he's at physically, mentally. He did have some really good moments in the last window. So I think as much as Pochettino says it's about your club form, he's going to have a little bit of a taste of how good our last couple of windows have been, and Gio Reyna has been a part of that. And he's trying to build this group for the World Cup. So I think he knows his strengths and weaknesses, and I think he's going to two tough games against Belgium and Portugal for sure. It'll be interesting to see where this final roster. I mean, you got Adams out. You've got who else is out? We got a couple other guys. Dest is out. So again, this is not the final roster for the World Cup. There's still 3 or 4 guys that will be on this roster that aren't on this list.
Anybody stuck out to you, Pierre, that got inclusions on the team? I mean, we talked about Sebastian Berhalter's excellent play at the weekend. He gets a call in again, and I think many people expected that based off his play over the past year and a half. He seems like a guy who's really pushing for more minutes in the U.S. squad into the World Cup.
Yeah, I mean, listen, if I see the Sebastian Berhalter that I saw on Sunday against Minnesota United, I mean, he looks like a guy who should be playing as many minutes as possible, really. As far as the roster goes, nothing too in particular jumped out at me, to be perfectly honest. It's just a matter of, I try not to let myself get too excited when this time of year rolls around. I just, I look at the roster, I was like, okay, I see some pieces, I see some good names here. Is it enough? Is there enough cohesion? Is there enough chemistry with this team? That's what I'm eager to see. It's not so much about, who's there. It's I want to see what type of soccer they're going to be playing. What type of cohesion this group is going to have together. So nothing in particular really jumps out. I'm eager to see them get on the field. Let's just get on the field. Show me what we got before the summer rolls around. And then I'll probably have a little bit more of a better understanding and feeling of what we're looking like going into the World Cup.
Yeah, I want to see what this team looks like without Tyler Adams in that midfield and what they can do, because obviously his injuries impact things, and hopefully he's available for the World Cup, but it'll be interesting to see how they adapt without Tyler Adams this go around. But guys, I'm looking forward to this game on Sunday. Minnesota United, Seattle Sounders at Allianz Field, 1:30 kickoff. A nice middle of the day kickoff at Allianz Field. Should be some gorgeous weather. As we said, Apple TV, Big Fox this weekend, and then ESPN Radio. Looking forward to it. Pierre, thanks for stopping by for the first time.
Yeah, it was great guest. We're gonna have you more often for sure.
Yeah, guys, it's been a pleasure. And Jonathan, forgive me already for when I come back. We'll probably talk a little more Killers music with Manny on the next one.
Oh,
yeah,
I'm absolutely in.
Yeah,
I love the Killers.
Can't wait, guys.
I'm in for it. Manny, good stuff from you. We'll talk to you on Sunday at Allianz Field. And then Loons fans, thanks for tuning in every week. Thanks to the production staff, Grace Dearson, Kyle Hayward, Evan Entler for putting this on every week. Loons fans, we'll talk to you next week.